Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of me talking about creepypastas, reading the creepypastas, and giving a short analysis. This is part 3. I have 2 other videos if you want to see, creepypastas like Jeff the Killer, Zalgo, Eyeless Jack, the freaking Lavender Town Syndrome. So go on and click those videos. This is part 3. You know what to do. If you don't, I just read the creepypastas, give me my thoughts later. And finally, here are the creepypastas we have for today. These creepypastas are Sonic.exe, Gateway of the Mind, Smile Dog, Sally or Come Play With Me, and Candle Cove. Let's get started. I'm a total Sonic the Hedgehog fan, much like everyone else. I like the newer games, but I don't mind playing the classics. I don't think I've ever played glitchy or hacked games before, though. I don't think I want to play any after the experience I had. It started on a nice summer afternoon. I was playing Sonic Unleashed. I liked how you get to explore the towns in it, until I noticed out of my peripheral vision that the mailman had arrived and put something in my mailbox, as usual, and left. I paused my game to go see what I got in the mail. The only thing in the mailbox was a CD case for computers and a note I took it inside. I looked at the note first and realized it was from my dear friend, Kyle, whom I heard from in 2 weeks. I know that because I recognized his handwriting, though what was weird is how it looked. It looked badly written and scratchy and somewhat difficult to read, as if Kyle was having a hard time writing it down and did it in a hurry. This is what he wrote. Tom, I can't take it anymore. I had to get rid of this thing somehow before it was too late, and I was hoping you'd do it for me. I can't do it, he's after me, and if you don't destroy the CD, he'll come after you too. He's too fast for me. Please, Tom. Destroy this godforsaken disc before he comes after you too. It's too late for me. Destroy the disc and you'll destroy him, but do it quick, otherwise he'll catch you. Don't even play the game. It's what he wants, just destroy it, please. Well, that was certainly weird. Even though Kyle is my best friend and I haven't seen him in like 2 weeks, I didn't do what he asked me. I didn't think after that simple gaming disc would do anything bad to him. After all, it's just a game, right? Boy, was I wrong about that. Anyway, I looked at the disc and it looks like any other computer CDR disc, except it had black marker on it written Sonic.exe, and it was much unlike Kyle's handwriting, meaning that he must have gotten it from someone else, like a pawn shop or eBay. When I saw Sonic on the writing of the CD, I was actually excited and wanted to play it since I'm a big Sonic fan. I went up to my room and turned on my computer and put the disc in and installed the game. When the title screen popped up, I noticed that it was the first Sonic game. I was like, awesome, because like I said earlier, I like the classics. The first thing I noticed that was out of place was when I pressed start, there was a split second when I saw the title image turn into something much different. Something that I now consider horrifying before cutting to black. I remember what the image looked like in the split second before. The game cut to black. The sky had darkened, the title emblem was rusted and ruined, the Sega 1991 was now instead Sega 666, and the water had turned red, like blood, except it looked hyper-realistic. But the freakiest thing that was in the split-second frame was Sonic. His eyes were pitch black and bleeding with 2 glowing red dots staring right at me, and his smile and stretched wider up to the edge of his face. I was rather disturbed about the image when I saw it, though I figured that it was just a glitch and forgot about it. After it cut to black, I had stayed like that for about 10 seconds or so, and then another weird thing happened. The save file select from Sonic the Hedgehog 3 popped up, and I was like, WTF? What's this doing in the first Sonic game? Anyway, then I noticed something off. The background was the dark cloudy sky of the bad Stardust Speedway level from Sonic CD, and there were only 3 save files. The music was that creepy Caverns of Winter music from Earthbound, only it was extended and seemed to have been in reverse, and the image for the save file where you see a preview of the level you're on is just red static for all 3 files. What freaked me out was that there were more characters in the select. It showed only Tails, Knuckles, and to my surprise, Dr. Robotnik. Now, I was sure that something was up. I mean, how can you play a Robotnik in a classic Sonic game, for crying out loud? That's when I realized that this wasn't a glitchy game. It was a hacked game. Yeah, it definitely looked hacked. It was really creepy, but as a smart gamer, I wasn't scared. Or at least I try not to be. Told myself that. It was just a hacked game and there's nothing wrong with that. Anyway, shaking off the creeped out feeling, I picked file 1 and chose Tails. And when I selected and got started, the game froze for about 5 seconds and I heard a creepy pixelated laugh that sounded an awful lot like that Kefka guy from Final Fantasy before cutting to black. The screen stayed black for about 10 seconds or more. Then it showed the typical level title thing, except the simplistic shapes were different shades of red, and the text showed only Hill Act 1. The screen faded in and the level title vanished, revealing Tails in the Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1. The music was different though. It sounded like a peaceful melody in reverse. Anyway, I started playing and had Tails start running like you would in any Sonic game. What was odd though was that Tails was running along the level and there was nothing but flat ground and few trees for like 5 minutes. That was when the peaceful music started to lower down into slow, deep tones very slowly as I kept going. I suddenly saw something and I stopped to see what it was. It was one of the small animals lying dead on the ground bleeding. Tails had a shocked and saddened look on his face that I never saw him have before. As I had him move along and he kept that worried look on his face, as he kept moving on, I saw more dead animals as Tails moves past them, looking more and more worried as the music lowers and he moves past some dead animals. I was shocked to see how they all died. They looked like somebody killed them in rather gruesome ways. Squirrels were hanged on trees with what appeared to be their entrails hanging out. A bunny had all 4 of his limbs torn off and a duck had his eyes gouged out and his throat slit. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw this massacre, and apparently so did Tails. After a few more seconds there was no more animals and this music seemed to have stopped. I still kept Tails to continue. After a few minutes passed, after the music stopped, Tails was running up a hill and then he stopped. It wasn't until I saw why. Sonic was there on the other side of the screen with his back against Tails, with his eyes closed. Tails looked happy to see Sonic, but then his smile faltered, obviously noticing that Sonic wasn't responding to him, if not acting as if he was totally oblivious of Tails' presence. Tails walked slowly towards Sonic, and I noticed that I wasn't even moving my keyboard to make him move, so this had to have been a cutscene. Suddenly I began to have a growing feel of dread as Tails walked closer to Sonic to get his attention. I felt that Tails was in danger and something bad was going to happen. I heard a faint static growing louder as Tails was but inches away from Sonic and stopped and stuck his hand out to touch him. That foreboding feeling in my gut was growing stronger and I felt the urge to tell Tails to get away from Sonic as the static grew louder. Suddenly in a split second I saw Sonic's eyes open and they were black with those red glowing dots, just like the title image. Though there wasn't a smile, when that happened the screen turned black and the static sound was off. It stayed black for about 7 seconds and the white text appeared, forming a message saying, "Hello, do you want to play with me?" At this point I was creeped out. I didn't want to continue with the game, but my curiosity got the better of me when I was taken to a different level with the level title now saying Hide and Seek. This time I was in Angel Island level from Sonic 3 and it looked like everything was on fire. Tails looked as though he was scared out of his wits this time. He actually looked at me and made frantic gestures to me as if he wanted to get out of the area he was in as fast as possible. I wanted to start getting freaked out by this. I mean, Tails was actually breaking the 4th wall, trying to tell me to get him out of there. So I pressed down on the arrow key as hard as I could and made him run as fast as he could. A pixelated version of that creepy theme when you meet Shadow at the Ark as Robotnik from SA2 was playing as I made Tails trek through the desolate forest, trying to help him escape from whatever he was trying to run from. Suddenly I heard that creepy laugh again, that awful Kefka laugh. Right after 10 seconds have passed as I helped Tails through the forest, and then I started seeing flashes of Sonic popping everywhere on the screen, again with those black and red eyes. The music changed to that suspenseful drowning jingle as I see Sonic behind Tails slowly gaining up on him flying. Sonic wasn't running, he was actually flying. That flying pose his sprite was making looked very similar to Metal Sonic's flying pose in Sonic CD. Except it was just Sonic and he had that black and red eyes again, only this time he had the most deranged looking grin on his face. He looked as though he was enjoying the torment he was giving the poor little fox as he gained up on him. Suddenly, when Tails laid there and started crying for 15 seconds, the scene was rather upsetting to watch and I kind of teared up myself. But then Sonic appeared right in front of Tails and Tails looked up in horror. Blood started to come down those blackened eyes of Sonic's as a grin slowly grew from his face. As he looked down at the horrified fox, I could do nothing but watch. Just in a split second, Sonic lunged at Tails right before the screen went black. There was a loud screeching noise that only lasted 5 seconds. The text returned, only this time it said, "You're too slow. Want to try again?" And then that god-awful laugh came with it. I was so shocked by what had happened and what I had seen. Did Sonic murder Tails? No, he couldn't have. He and Tails are supposed to be like best friends, right? Why did Sonic do that to him? I shook the shock off as I was brought back to the character select screen. The save file that had Tails was different. Tails was no longer in that box itself, but in the TV screen itself, which was flickering with that red static. Tails' expression scared me. His eyes were black and bleeding, his orange fur had gone black, and he had an expression of anguish on his face. Trying to ignore it, I picked Knuckles next. The laugh came again, and that screen cut to black again and stayed there for another 10 seconds. This time the level said, "You can't run." I was really freaked out by now. I couldn't really tell if this was a glitch, a hack, or some kind of sick twisted joke. Or anything really. But despite my fear of what happened next, I kept playing. The next level looked much different. It had the ground of the scrap brain zone, but the sky background looked like the main menu. It had that dark reddish cloudy sky, but it was the music that creeped me out the most. It sounded like Geiger's theme right after you beat Pokey in Earthbound 1. I also noticed that Knuckles looked afraid just like Tails did, though not as much, more rather he looked a little unnerved. He broke the fourth wall just like Tails and looked as if he wasn't sure about what was going on, but I made him move anyway. He ran down the straight pathway in this dark level, and as he did, the screen started to flicker red static a couple of times, and then that maddening laugh came again. That maddening Kefka laugh. Then after a few seconds of running, I noticed several bloodstains on the metallic ground. I felt a growing sense of fear again, thinking something horrible is going to happen to Knuckles. He looked nauseated walking down this blood-stained road, but I still kept him going. Suddenly, as Knuckles ran, Sonic appeared right in front of him with those black and red eyes, and then the red static appeared again. When the static vanished from showing nothing but black screen with text saying "Found you," I was now scared. Sonic found Knuckles already. What was going on? Anyway, red static came again, and then I was back to the level. Knuckles looked like he was panicking, and Sonic was nowhere to be found. And this time, that high-pitched squealing from Silent Hill's 1 final boss was playing. Was this some kind of boss battle with Sonic? I hope to God it wasn't, honestly. Suddenly, Sonic appeared right before Knuckles in what appeared to be pixelated black smoke. I made Knuckles turn and then punch Sonic, but Sonic vanished in black pixelated smoke before I could even land a hit. That terrible laugh went off again. Then Sonic appeared behind Knuckles again, and then I made a punch again, and Sonic vanished again laughing. Knuckles was panicking even more, and even I felt like I was going crazy. Sonic was practically playing with us. He was playing a sick twisted little mind game with me and Knuckles. Another cutscene played as Knuckles fell to his knees and clutched his head sobbing. I felt his agony. Sonic was actually driving us both crazy. And then in a split second, Sonic lunged at Knuckles, at the screen going black with another distorted screeching noise that lasted for at least 3 seconds. Another text message appeared. So many souls to play with, so little time, would you agree? What the hell just was going on? I started to think Sonic was actually trying to talk to me through the game, but I was too scared to think of that. I was brought back to the main menu, and this time, that second file box had Knuckles in the TV screen, his red fur darkened to a reddish gray. Dreadlocks were dripping with blood, and his eyes were black and bleeding too, and he had that look of sadness on his eyes. I began to think that those are the actual characters trapped in those TV screens on the save files, but I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. So I shut off the game and took a break. I took a nap, which I wish I hadn't, because I then began to have the most disturbing nightmare. I was in a pitch black darkness, though I was under the light given off by a lamp that hung high above my head. I could hear the cries of Knuckles and Tails nearby. They were saying stuff like, "Help us," and "Why did you give us to him? Run away before he gets you too." Their cries died out as I heard Sonic laugh. His laugh, it sounded like some sort of distorted Kefka laugh. "You're a lot fun to play with, kid. Just like your friend Kyle, though. He didn't last long." I was scared and looking around for the source of the voice. "It won't be long now until you join him and all my other friends too." I saw him walking towards me, flickering in and out in several directions. "You can't run, kid. You're in my world now, just like the others." When he grabbed me, and I saw his bleeding black and red eye, grinning face, I woke up with a fright. After a couple of hours, I decided to continue playing the game. I don't know why, but I had to know. I had to figure out why was this happening. So I turned on the computer, turned on the game, and selected Robotnik next. This time I was in some kind of hallway. It didn't really look like it was from any classic Sonic game, though it has the pixelated style. The floor was shiny and checkered. The walls were dark grayish purple with animated candlelights and a few dark bloodstains here and there. There was a dark red curtain hanging above on that top part of the screen. Every 12 seconds or so that red curtain sways very slowly, but whenever you're playing the game you can barely see it move. The music was oddly pleasant, a piano playing a rather sad yet peaceful song. But I knew better. This was the song that played in Hill Act 1, only it wasn't in reverse. Robotnik didn't look entirely nervous like Tails and Knuckles did, but he did have a suspicious look on his face, as if he was just a bit paranoid. He did a little bit of animation when I just left him standing. He turns his head to me to the left, and then to the right at least twice, and then shrugs at me, as if he has no idea where he was or what was going on. Even though I was scared out of my mind about what was going to happen, I had Robotnik continue onward. He did his usual running animation. You know, the one where you beat him at the end of the classic Sonic games and you chase him. As we continued going through the hallway, I stopped at a long flight of stairs leading downward. Now I was nervous. Even Robotnik seemed unsure of himself, though I pressured onward. As I led Robotnik down the stairs, I noticed that the walls have gotten darker and more reddish. The red torches are now an eerie blue. Then we landed onto another hallway. This one was longer than the last one. And then we headed down another flight of stairs, down. This one was much longer, look at least like 1 full minute. And then I heard the horrid Kefka laugh again. And then the music slowly faded until it was quiet. As it did, the walls turned more dark red and the torches were a black flame now. When Robotnik landed onto the third hallway, I noticed he now looked really creeped out, though he tried to hide it. I couldn't blame him, I was also scared. Suddenly, Sonic popped right in front of Robotnik the same way he did Knuckles, and then red static. The red static lasted for about 15 seconds, then it showed me a most unpleasant image. The image showed a hyper-realistic of Sonic standing in the darkness, where you can only see his face while his head and torso faded into black. And when I say hyper-realistic, I mean like it looked so real that you could see the blue fur, and you could actually feel the fur if you touched the screen. His face. Oh god, he had the most horrifying smile I've ever seen, and that's saying something considering I saw that image at the start of the game. His eyes are wide and black and once again crying blood, which also looked hyper-realistic, and there were 2 small, glowing red dots in those black eyes staring right at me, as if staring into my mind. His grin was wide and demonic. It literally stretched to the sides of his faces like a Cheshire cat, except Sonic had fangs. Very sharp fangs. Much like the werehog's teeth, except more vicious looking. Somewhat yellowish, and from the look of it, he had stains of blood and small bits of flesh on his lips and fangs, as if he ate some animal. I stared at the gruesome image for a good 30 seconds, never taking my eyes off it. I felt as if he was actually looking at me, smiling at me. That face, it just took 10 seconds for it to etch itself into my brain for good. Then the screen flickered with red static again 3 times, and on the 3rd time I heard that Kefka laugh. Except this time it sounded distorted, demonic even. It went back to the image again, except this time there was the text again. Though it was messed up, it was pretty much one of those most horrifying things I've looked at since I had this game. It said, "I am God." It was then I read what the message was looking at Sonic when it hit me. I realized right then and there. This Sonic was a monster. A pure, evil, sadistic, all-powerful, nightmarish, demented monster. And all of his victims, including Tails, Knuckles, Robotnik, Kyle, are just his little toys. And the game is the very gateway into his chaotic, nightmarish world and the very hell his victims are trapped in. Suddenly, in actual split second, I screamed as Sonic lunged at the screen, screeching loudly with his mouth wide open to an unnatural length, revealing nothing but a literal spiraling abyss of pure darkness before the red static came again. This time much louder and distorted, so loud that it hurt my ears. I yelled and grabbed my ears as the red static screeched for a long, good 7 seconds. Then it stopped and showed nothing but black screen. As I sat there for staring at the black screen, one last text came up. "Ready for round 2, Tom?" That Kefka laugh, now sounding more clear as if Sonic was right behind me, played again all 3 times as I looked at this text in shock and confusion. Then I got booted back to the main menu, and this time the 3rd save file had a TV image of Robotnik in the game. Tormented state as Tails and Knuckles. Robotnik's skin turned as dull gray, his mustache drooped and had blackened. His glasses broke and his blood is coming from them, and had a mere dead-like expression on his face. I looked at Tails, Knuckles, Robotnik. I cried a bit. I pitied them for the agony they're going through. They were forever trapped within the game, forever tormented by that horrid hedgehog, and always will be. Then the computer shut itself off. I couldn't turn it back on no matter what I did. I sat there for maybe like 25 seconds, horrified by what had just happened. Sonic is the very embodiment of evil. He tortures people who play his game in more ways than one, and then when he gets bored, he drags you into the game. Literally drags you to hell, where he can play with you always as his toy. I can't get that game out of my computer. I think it's stuck in there, but at least I managed to turn it back on now. After I sat there for like 25 seconds, I heard a voice right behind me, like a whisper. Try to keep this interesting for me, Tom. I turned around to see where the voice came from, and when I saw, made me scream, sitting on my bed, staring right at me. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concern. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against a wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness." For 5 hours straight, he continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. Another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and He has abandoned us," and his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death. I first met in person with Mary E. in the summer of 2007. I hadn't arranged with her husband of 15 years, Terrence, to see her for an interview. Mary had initially agreed since I was not a newsman, but rather an amateur writer gathering information for a few early college assignments, and if all went according to plan, some pieces of fiction. We scheduled the interview for a particular weekend when I was in Chicago on an unrelated business, but at the last moment, Mary changed her mind and locked herself in the couple's bedroom. Refusing to meet with me, for half an hour I sat with Terrence as we camped outside the bedroom door. I listened and taking notes while he attempted fruitlessly to calm his wife. The things Mary said made little sense, but fit with the pattern I was expecting. Though I could not see her, I could tell from her voice that she was crying, and more often than not, her objections to speaking with me centered around an incoherent diatribe on her dreams, her nightmares. Terrence apologized profusely when we ceased the exercise, and I did my best to take it in stride. Recall that I wasn't a reporter in search of a story, but merely a curious young man in search of information. Besides, I thought at the time I could perhaps find another similar case if I put my mind and resource to it. Mary E. was the sysop for a small Chicago-based bulletin board system in 1992. When she first encountered Smile.jpg and her life changed forever. She and Terrence had been married for only 5 months. Mary was one of an estimated 400 people who saw the image. when it was posted as a hyperlink on the BBS. Though she is the only one who has spoken openly about the experience, the rest have remained anonymous, or perhaps dead. In 2005, when I was only in 10th grade, Smile.jpg was first brought to my attention by burgeoning interest in web-based phenomena. Mary was the most often cited victim of what is sometimes referred to as Smile Dog. The being Smile.jpg is reputed to display. What caught my interest, other than the obvious macabre elements of the cyber legend and my proclivity towards such things, was the sheer lack of information. Usually to the point that people don't believe it even exists, other than as rumor or hoax. It is unique because though the entire phenomena centers on a picture file, that file is nowhere to be found on the internet. Certainly many photo-manipulated pictures litter the web, showing up with the most frequently on sites such as the image board 4chan, particularly the X board focused on paranormal subboards. It is suspected that these are fakes because they do not have the effect the true Smile.jpg is believed to have, namely sudden onset temporal lobe epilepsy and acute anxiety. The purported reaction in the viewer is one of the reasons the phantom-like Smile.jpg is regarded with such disdain, since it is patiently absurd through, depending on who you ask, the reluctance to acknowledge Smile.jpg's existence might be just as much out of fear as it is out of disbelief. Neither Smile.jpg nor SmileDog is mentioned anywhere on Wikipedia, though the website features articles on such others. Perhaps more scandalous shock sites as Hello.jpg or Two Girls One Cup. Any attempt to create a page pertaining to Smile.jpg is summarily deleted by any encyclopedia's many admins. Encounters with Smile.jpg are the stuff of internet legend. Mary E's story is not unique. There are unverified rumors of Smile.jpg showing up in the early days of Usenet, and even one persistent tale, that in 2002 a hacker flooded the forums of humor and satire website Something Awful with Smile Dog pictures, rendering almost half the forum's users at the time epileptic. It is also said that in the mid to late 90s, the Smile.jpg circulated on the Usenet, and as an attachment of a chain email with the subject line, "Smile, God loves you." Yet despite the huge exposure these stunts would generate, there are very few people who admit to having experienced any of them, and no trace of the file or any link has ever been discovered. Those who claim to have seen Smile.jpg often weakly joke that they were far too busy to save a copy of the picture to their hard drive. However, all alleged victims offer the same description of the photo. A dog-like creature, usually described as appearing similar to a Siberian husky, illuminated by the flash of the camera, sits in a dim room, the only background detail that is visible being a human hand extending from the darkness near the left side of the frame. The hand is empty, but is usually described as beckoning, of course. Most attention is given to the dog. The muzzle of the beast is reputedly split in a wide grin, revealing 2 rows of very white, very straight, very sharp, and very human-looking teeth. This, of course, not a description given immediately after viewing the picture, but rather a recollection of the victims who claim to have seen the picture endlessly, repeated in their mind's eye during the time they are in reality having epileptic fits. These fits are reported to continue intermittently, often while the victims sleep, resulting in very vivid and disturbing nightmares. These may be treated with medication, though in some cases it is more effective than others. Mary E, I assumed, was not an effective medication. That was why, after my visit to her apartment in 2007, I sent out feelers to several folklore and urban legend-oriented news groups, websites, mailing lists, hoping to find out the name of the supposed victim of Smile.jpg, who felt more interested in talking about his or her experiences. For a time, nothing happened, and at length I forgot completely about my pursuit, since I had begun my freshman year of college and was quite busy. Mary contacted me via email. However, near the beginning of March of 2008, I got sent this. Dear Mr. L, I am incredibly sorry about my behavior last summer when you came to interview me. I hope you understand that it was no fault of yours, but rather my own problems that led me to act out as I did. I realize that I could have handled the situation more decorously. However, I hope you will forgive me. At the time, I was afraid. You see, for 15 years I have been haunted by Smile.jpg. Smile Dog comes to me in my sleep every night. I know that sounds silly, but it is true. There is an ineffable quality about my dreams, my nightmares, that makes them completely unlike any other real dreams I have ever had. I do not move and do not speak. I simply look ahead, and the only thing ahead of me is the scene from that horrible picture. I see the beckoning hand, and I see Smile Dog. It talks to me. It is not a dog, of course, though I'm not quite sure what it really is. It tells me it will leave me alone if only I do as it asks. All I must do is say, spread the word. That is how it phrases it demands. And now exactly what it means, it wants me to show it to someone else. And the week after my incident, I received in the email a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was only a 3/2-inch floppy diskette. Without having to check, I knew precisely what was on it. I thought for a long time about my opinions. I could show it to a stranger, co-worker. I could even show it to Terrence. As much as the idea disgusted me and what would happen then, well, if Smile Dog kept its word, I could sleep. Yet, if it lied, what would I even do? And who was it to say something worse were not to come for me if I did as the creature asked? So I did nothing for 15 years, though I kept the diskette hidden amongst my things. Every night for 15 years, Smile Dog has come to me in my sleep and demanded I spread the word. For 15 years I have stood strong. Even though there had been many times, many of my fellow victims on the BBS board where I first encountered Smile JPEG stopped posting. I heard some of them committed suicide. Others remained completely silent, simply disappearing off the face of the web. They are the ones I worry about the most. I sincerely hope you will forgive me, Mr. L, but last summer when you contacted me and my husband about the interview, I was near the breaking point. I decided I was going to give you the floppy diskette. I did not care if Smile Dog was lying or not. I wanted it to end. You were strangers, someone I had no connection with, and I thought I could not feel sorrow when you took the diskette as part of your research and sealed your fate. Before you arrived, I realized that I was plotting to ruin your life. I cannot stand the thought, and in fact, I still cannot. I am ashamed, Mr. L, and I hope that this was a warning that will dissuade you from further investigation of Smile.jpg. You may in time encounter someone who is, if not weaker than I, then wholly more depraved. Someone who will not hesitate to follow Smile Dog's orders. Stop while you are still whole. Sincerely, Mary E. Terrence contacted me later that month with the news that his wife killed herself. While cleaning up the various things she left behind, closing email accounts and the likes, he happened upon the above message. He was a man in shambles. He wept as he told me to listen to his wife's advice. He'd found the diskette he revealed and burned it until it was nothing but a stinking pile of blackened plastic. The part that was most disturbed him, however, was how the diskette had hissed as it melted, like some sort of animal, he said. I will admit that I was a little uncertain about how to respond to this. At first I thought perhaps it was a joke, with the couple belatedly playing with the situation in order to get a rise out of me. A quick check of several Chicago newspapers' online obituaries, however, proved that Mary E. was indeed dead. There was of course no mention of suicide in the article. I decided that for a time at least, I would not further pursue the subject of Smile.jpg, especially since I had finals coming up at the end of May. But the world has its odd ways of testing us. Almost a full year after I'd returned from my disastrous interview with Mary E., I received another email. I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you are interested in Smile Dog. I have saw it if it was not as bad as everyone says. I have sent it to you here. Just spreading the word. The final line chilled me through the bones. According to my email client, there was one final attachment called Naturally Smile.jpg. I considered downloading it for some time. It was most likely a fake, I imagined, and even if it weren't, I was never wholly convinced of Smile.jpg's peculiar powers. Mary E.'s account had shaken me, yes, but she was probably mentally ill or unbalanced. After all, how could a simple image do what Smile.jpg was said to accomplish? What sort of creature was it that could break one's mind with only the power of the eye? And if such things were patently absurd, then why did the legend exist at all? If I downloaded the image, if I looked at it, and if Mary turned out to be correct, if Smile Dog came to me in my dreams demanding I spread the word, what would I do? Would I live my life as Mary had, fighting against the urge to give in until I die? Or would I simply spread the word? Eager to finish this, and if I chose the latter route, how could I do it? Whom would I burden it to? If I went through with my earlier intention to write a short article about Smile.jpg, I decided I could attach it with evidence, and anyone who read the article, anyone who took interest, would be effective. And even assuming the Smile Dog attached to the email was genuine, would I be capricious enough to save myself in that manner? Could I spread the word? Yes. Yes, I could. The summer was nice and warm that year. The sun, as always, brought warmth to your skin. The light breezes that swept through the neighborhood made the days not too hot or cold. It was simply perfect weather. But one summer Sally will never forget. Sally was a young girl, 8 years old, long curly brown hair and bright green eyes. She was always polite. She never lied and did as she was told. Her mother and father simply adored her. They couldn't ask for a better daughter. Sally giggled as she played with her friends outside of their home. Various games like hopscotch, jump rope, even dolls and tag. Sally's mother smiled warmly at the innocent sight and wiped her hands on her apron, calling out, "Sally, come inside now. It's time for lunch." Sally looked up from her doll and smiled. "Okay, Mommy." Sitting down at the dinner table, Sally lightly bounced in her seat, excited for who knows what. Her mother placed down a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with the crust cut off, some carrot and celery sticks on the side, and a juice to drink. "Thank you, Mama." "You're welcome, sweetie." As the child began to take hold of her sandwich, her mother took a seat across from the girl and smiled, watching her eat. "Guess what? Your Uncle Johnny's coming over." Sally looked up and smiled, the corner of her lips and traces of peanut butter on them. Johnny?" She repeated through her food. Her mother laughed and nodded. He's coming to help Daddy with his job, and to look after you too. Maybe all of us can go to the carnival too." Sally chewed the rest of her bite quickly and swallowed. "Can Sarah and Jenny come too?" Her mother looked up and thought, "Well, that's up to their mother and dads to say, but if they can, sure." Again, the child giggled and bounced in her seat again, now even more excited of this year's summer vacation. Over the course of the next few days, Uncle Johnny drove up to the house. Climbing out of his car, the man stretched his arms over his head and let out a tired sigh. "Uncle Johnny," a small voice chirped, earning the attention of the man. Sally dropped the jump rope she was playing with and ran over to the family member, hugging him. "Hey, Sal, have you been?" he asked, lifting the girl up with ease, giving her a proper hug. The girl giggled and looked back to her friends, who were now waving in their direction. "I've been playing with Sarah and Jenny. Let's go inside and tell Mama you're here." "Sounds like a great idea." He smiled and walked inside his house, calling out to the woman. "Marie, I'm here," he called, followed by Sally mimicking him. "Mama, he's here." The housewife hurried out of the kitchen and smiled to see Johnny made it. "Johnny, you got here safe and sound." The man placed the girl down on the ground and gave her bottom a pat to send her off, and hugged the woman. "Of course I did. Why else wouldn't I come here safe and sound?" He laughed, walking into the kitchen with the woman. Sally trotted over to the front door, calling out that she was going back outside to play. "Make sure you come in before dark." "Yes, ma'am." And off the girl went. As dinner drew near, Sally's father came home, happy to see his brother was there as well. Walking in with his daughter, he strolled up to Johnny with a handshake and a hug. "Nice to see you, man. How have you been?" he asked, crossing his arms, watching his wife set the table up for supper. Johnny gave a shrug, fiddling with his thumbs. "Karen and I split up." "Oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry." Johnny shook his head with a smile. "Nah, it's alright. I'm happy I can move freely without having someone constantly wanting to know where I am and what I'm doing." The two men laughed together, making their way to the table to eat. Thank you. I'm glad you like it." It's yummy, Mama." The adult smiled and chuckled from the child's praise. Plate after plate was empty, and Sally began to yawn over and over again, rubbing her eyes with her hands. Her mother smiled and gently rubbed her back. "Looks like someone is tired. Time for bed." Sally nodded and hopped off her seat, picking up her plate and carrying it to the sink. Her mother rose up to take her to bed, but stopped from John grabbing a hold of her arm. "I'll take her to bed," he smiled, earning one in return. "Alright, thank you, John." The man nodded, watching the woman make her way to clean the dishes and put up any leftovers, then looked to see his brother leave for the bathroom to wash up and followed after the young girl to her room. John smiled and closed the door behind him, watching the girl rummage around through her dresser for pajamas to wear. "You need any help?" he asked. Watching the girl look up and nod. "Okay, let's see what you got." The man waltzed up alongside her and began looking through her various pajamas. "Got some strawberry printed ones. I bet you'll smell just like them in your dreams." He took the shirt up and showed her, giving it a few deep inhales. Sally giggled and shook her head, indicating she didn't want to wear her strawberry pajamas. Johnny nodded and placed the shirt back, then pulled out another shirt with a unicorn on it. "How about this one? Bet you'll ride on Miss Unicorn here." Again, the child giggled and shook her head no. The man let out a small huff before placing it back, then took out a regular white nightgown. "How about this? Be able to turn into a princess with this." Sally's eyes lit up and clapped her hands excitedly and nodded. Placing the gown on her bed, he reached over to her and began to unbutton her skirt. "I can get dressed, Uncle," she said with a smile, looking down at his hands on her shirt. The man smiled back and nodded, continuing to work his way down her shirt. "I bet you can, but you're tired. And why not have some help?" he asked, watching Sally nod a few times. Once getting her shirt unbuttoned, he slipped it off her shoulders and gave her tummy a nice poke, making her giggle. He grinned and took a hold of the rim of her shorts and pulled them down. Finally, the man grabbed a hold of her nightgown and pushed the opening over her head, making sure her arms could go through the sleeves. "All done," he said, happily watching the girl smile back, giggling when she bounded on her top of her bed. Johnny rose up and picked up her clothes. The door opened up and it walked in Sally's mother, coming to tuck her in. "You ready for bed?" she asked, walking around the bed. Johnny looked up and hurried over to the other side of the bed. "I'll tuck her in, that's okay." Marie looked up at him and smiled, shaking her head. "Of course not." She looked down at her daughter and leaned in, kissing the child on her forehead. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Mama," giving the girl a gentle rub with her thumb on her forehead. The woman took the clothes Johnny had and made her way out of the room. Johnny smiled to the mother and walked over to the light switch, flicking it off. He carefully closed the door to her room and locked it. Slowly, he looked over his shoulder towards Sally. Johnny wore a chilling, crooked smile. After the next few days, Marie noticed that Sally wasn't acting herself. She wasn't smiling as brightly as she did. She wasn't chipper and didn't speak with the same amount of happiness. Marie took a hold of the child's hand before she left to play with her friends and took her aside. Sally looked up at her mother with a confused look. "Honey, are you feeling okay?" she asked, kneeling down to be at the child's height. Sally stared at her idly and slowly began to weep. Her mother widened her eyes in confusion. "Sally? Mama, I didn't want to..." The girl managed to say, though hiccup sobbed. "Didn't want to do what, sweetie?" I didn't want to play. I didn't want to play his game." The child looked up at her mother and hugged her tight. He touched me and made me touch him." Marie frowned and gently began stroking the child's hair, comforting her, lightly shushing her to calm her down. "It's okay. Mama's here now. It was a nightmare, that's all. The girl had a scary nightmare. Everything is fine now, okay? Don't worry about it anymore." She watched Sally looking up at her, her breathing chopped up from her crying, and smiled. "Okay, Mama." Her mother smiled and kissed her forehead. "Now go wash up. Don't want to play with your friends with a dirty face." Sally let out a small giggle and ran off to the bathroom to wash her face. Later that day, Johnny and his brother came back home from work. Frank sighed, smiling when he saw Sally wave to him. The father waved back and closed the car door, making his way up to the house. Johnny looked up at Sally as well and smiled, waving to her. The child's smile slowly wilted, showing less happiness in it, but waved back as well. Johnny also walked inside the house, pausing when he heard the conversation between his brother and his wife. "Sally, what?" Frank asked. "She had a nightmare, a very bad one," she said. "He touched her? Well, who the hell is he?" "I don't know, Frank, but it was only a nightmare. I just wanted to inform you of what's been going on with her and why she was acting differently." Johnny furrowed his brows in anger, his knuckles turning white, then calmed down quickly, thinking fast. He put on a smile and walked into the room, making it look like he just walked in through the conversation, and rose his brows. "Oops, did I interrupt something?" he asked, watching the couple shake their heads. Johnny smiled again and thumbed back in the direction of the car. "I'm gonna head to the store. You need anything, Marie?" The woman smiled and looked towards the kitchen. "Yes, actually, can you get me some eggs, milk, bread, and juice?" Johnny nodded, about to leave, until he paused. "Sally wanted to come along too. Just wanted to inform you." Marie smiled. "Thank you, John." He nodded again and made his way out of the house, keys in hand. Looking out to Sally with her friends, he cupped his hands over his mouth. "Sally!" The child looked up at him and stared. "Come on, let's go to the store." John made his way over to the car, gesturing for the girl to follow him. Sally sat there for a moment, then placed her dolls on the grass. "I'll be back. Please watch over Marzipan and Lily for me." Jenny and Sarah smiled and nodded, continuing to play their game of dolls without her. Sally's reluctantly made her way around the car, climbing into the passenger seat and buckled herself in. "Did Mama want you to go to the store?" she asked. Johnny nodded and put the keys in the ignition, turning it on, and backed out of the driveway. "Yep, she wants me to get some food for her. Maybe I can get you something too." He grinned, looking down at the child. Sally nervously smiled back and looking ahead. Watching the scenery pass by, as soon as they get to the road leading to the store, Sally noticed he wasn't slowing down to turn into the parking lot. She furrowed her brows, confused and looking up at him. "Uncle Johnny, the store is back that way," she said, pointing in the direction of the Whole Foods store, but nothing came from the man. He just continued driving, a very faint smile on his face. The child sat up and looked past the back seat, watching the store slowly grow smaller till it was out of sight. Realizing they weren't going to the grocery store, the child watched her uncle drive into the small parking lot in the community park near town. No one went to the park on Sundays. Sally felt nervous. Her breathing quickened, watching the man with wide eyes. Johnny put the car into the park and turned the ignition off, looking to the child, anger obviously showing in his features. "You told your mom what happened, didn't you?" he asked, watching the girl frantically shake her head no. "You're not playing the game right, Sally." His tone almost had a slight singing to it. The man reached over and pulled the girl to him, ignoring the struggle she was putting up and her whimpering pleas. "You said you'd play the game with me, Sally." You lied to me." Opening the car door beside him, the man climbed out along with the child and shoved her to the ground, quickly pinning her down, ignoring the cries and writhing the child was making. "You have to be punished now for breaking the rules," he said, in the slight sing-songy tone, and began to unbuckle his belt. This just in, a couple finds the body of an 8-year-old Sally Williams in the community park. This week-long search is now closed. More tonight at 9. She could have sworn she closed her door before climbing into bed. Guess I forgot. Getting up from the warmth and comfort of her bed, the teen made her way across the room and shut the door. Before she could climb back into her covers, a creak outside in the hall rose up. Was her parents up? They must have checked on her to see if she was asleep or something. As soon as she got her legs covered, the teen froze to fear as she heard some sort of faint sound of crying, though it sounded like a child. Slowly rising up from bed once more, the girl made her way to her door and opened it. The crying seemed to be louder outside of her room. Peering down the darkness, the teen crept down the hallway, following the sounds of the whimpering. Once getting to the end of the hall, the girl gasped. Sitting on the floor in front of the moonlit window was a little girl. She was hunched over crying. How did she get into her house? Through the window? Swallowing hard, the teen spoke up. Who are you? How did you get into my house? She asked. Suddenly, the crying stopped. The child slowly moved her trembling hands away from her face and looked behind her. Twitching lightly, blood replaced her tears, staining her hands. There was a deep clot of blood and hair on the side of her head. Blood leaking from the wound down her face and onto her dirty nightgown. Her bright green eyes seemed like they saw right through her soul. This is my house. The child spoke, her voice raspy, sounding as if she was struggling to speak. The girl's body twitched and wiggled oddly as she rose up to her feet and turned to face the teen. Her feet were dirty as if she'd been running through mud. Scrapes covered her knees and legs, and the end of her gown was torn and tattered. The name Sally was sewn into the front. Reaching out with her blood-soaked hand, the girl slowly smiled, blood staining her teeth as she spoke. Want to play with me? Subject: Candle Cove local kids show? Does anyone remember this kids show? It was called Candle Cove, and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found a reference to it anywhere, so I think of it as a local station around 1971 or 72. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on a weird time, like 4 p.m. It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and was 9 years old in 1972. Candle Cove was about pirates. I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl. Yes! Okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, really low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll, looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF though. Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean. Sky Shell. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple of months in 1971, not 72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was Channel 58. Whatever station that was, my mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughingstock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily, and there was a Calliope music constantly playing. Don't remember the girl's name. Janice? Jade? Or something? I think it was Janice. Thank you, Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughingstock in Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Ed Wynn voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wood and plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked. Haha, oh yeah, I remember now too. Do you remember this part, Sky Shell? You have to go inside. Ugh, Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or dark room where the treasure was, and the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened and closed it, ugh, it just looked so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above really tall, narrow teeth. Honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about like 5 when this show was on. Nightmare fuel. That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on the top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he had only one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette. The Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then. Jesus H. Christ, The Skin Taker. What kind of kid show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape, and his glass eyes, they were too big for his skull. Christ almighty. Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin? Yeah, I think so. Remember his mouth didn't open and close, his jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl, but at the camera and said, "To grind your skin." I am so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces and they were just screaming. And the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically and just all screaming and screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it. I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode. No, that not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show. Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God, I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed. Oh God, yes. The little girl, Janice, I remember seeing her shake, and the Skin Taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw craning so widely, I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off and it was the last time I watched it. I ran to tell my brother and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on. I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, and she remembered a kid's show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why. She said because I used to think it was strange that you said, "I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove," and then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the end of part 3. Yes, today we had a couple of heavy hitters here. I guess we should go over it quickly. Sonic.exe, garbage. It was so hard for me not to laugh when talking about the hyper-realistic, the Kefka laugh and all. And especially him being like so scared for what, Tails and Knuckles? Like, oh no, they're dying and I felt it in my heart. Like, oh my God, so stupid. Gateway of the Mind, little short and sweet. You know, it's good. You know, hopefully my throat doesn't go all bad. It mostly goes with the video. Smile Dog. It kind of felt like it was dragging at times, but I like the premise. Sally, Come Play With Me is a very infamous creepypasta. Of course, it has stuff to do with SA, especially with a minor. I'm gonna give my full thoughts of Sally in the tier list review. But I guess to give a short analysis or short thing, I personally didn't like the story. Not because of the subject. Well, actually, the subject matter was a big part of it. I just didn't think they did it correctly. Or the story wasn't that good to elicit some of the reactions, I guess. I don't know. I just didn't like, that we spent 2/3 of the story basically listening and experiencing a fucking grooming assault interaction, and then just the last 2 pages of the creepypasta is like, oh yeah, there's this girl that haunts the house. That's Sally. Yeah, I didn't really like that. And I think that's why I ended it with Candle Cove, which you can tell I was having a fun time reading it. I didn't read it from a long time, and now reading it again, it's taking me back when I first, read it. When you're reading these people who are in this thread talking about this childhood TV show, only to realize that maybe it wasn't real. And a very good creepypasta, recommended for beginners and people who want to dip their toes in this genre. But yeah, very interesting creepypastas we have. Thankfully, I'm almost done with this big, Halloween special of reading the most popular creepypastas. This video is long and I'm not gonna waste any more of your time. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, subscribe. It'll be very helpful, and get ready for part 4. Bye.